It's 5:30 a.m. right now. I'm just after waking up this minute. I'm still a little bit tired, but I have about an hour or so to get ready before I have to make my way down to the bus. I'm going to run in and get a really quick shower, and then I'm going to get dressed and grab some breakfast. I'm all packed up for the day right now, so I'm just going to head downstairs, grab something light to eat, because my stomach does be really sick in the mornings actually, and then I'll be on my way.
My name is Dooley, and as you may have guessed by now, every day I commute from Carlow to Ballyfermot for college. It's a 3-hour commute in total, and that's if the traffic isn't heavy. Every day I meet the same people and I see the same things. People often ask me how I do it, and I simply tell them it's just a part of life for me now, just like waking up in the morning. I want to find out how commuting has changed over the years and what effect it has on regular commuters. Is commuting these days easier because of the technology we have at our fingertips? I'm on a quest to find out. But first, I want to find out just how many people brace themselves for a lengthy journey every day. I spoke to Conor Faulkner, Director of Consumer Affairs at AA Ireland, about just that.
Well, there's about 2 million Irish registered cars, private cars on the road. There's about 2.5 million licensed drivers. Of those cars, how many are commuters? Well, it's a little bit difficult to say. In Dublin City, for example, in the city centre area, it's approximately 300,000. Now, in 2019, commuting traffic is back. In terms of the commute, it's back, but it is slightly changed. In the case of Dublin City, the city centre is not as bad as it used to be because public transport has improved and infrastructure has improved. But places like the M50, for example, has a higher volume of daily traffic than it has ever had before, even at the height of the Tiger boom.
I spoke to Edgar Morganroth, Professor of Economics at DCU Business School, who conducted research on commuting back in the early 2000s, to ask him what commuting was really like back then.
In 2002, there was already quite a bit of pressure, particularly in Dublin, in terms of commuter numbers. But since then, even though we had a concern at that point, 2002, since then the commuter numbers have grown significantly as the population has grown and the economy of Greater Dublin region has grown significantly.
What sort of a breakdown was there in terms of transport modes then?
Longer commutes were almost entirely done by car, and that is still the case. But shorter commutes within Dublin often use sustainable modes like the bus or walking.
What were travel distances like back then? So now we have a lot more motorways, better infrastructure. Were they longer back then?
No, they weren't. On average a little bit shorter than right now, but at that point there were already people travelling 100 kilometres or more, but on much worse roads. But the level of traffic was less, so the congestion wasn't so bad, and average speeds haven't changed all that much, even though that the infrastructure has improved.
Wilson Tighe is a second-year student who commutes from Carlow to Dublin for college.
Wilson, how often do you commute?
I commute 4 days out of the 7 that I have to go to college from Monday to Thursday. I commute because the student accommodation in Dublin is really expensive. Commuting from Carlow a month is €200, whilst living in Dublin is $600 a month, which is triple the figure that I have to be paying.
How long have you been commuting for, Wilson?
I've been commuting since September 2017, a year and a half basically. I commute to Dublin City on O'Connell Street from Carlow Town. If I have 9 a.m. lectures, I have to take the 20 to 7 bus, and then it takes me usually 2 hours because it's during rush hour time, and around an hour and a half on the other mornings.
Shauna McHugh is a third-year student who commutes from Kilkenny to Galway for college.
When I was studying up in NUI Galway last year, I would have travelled home most Friday evenings and back up then on the Sunday. It was quite a struggle for me. There were only 2 options really to get home to Kilkenny because I don't drive myself, so I'd have to get the train. So Irish Rail do a great service to and from Houston. That's really regular from Galway. And I'd have to change at Houston a lot of the time, travel all the way from Galway to Houston and then go from Houston to Kilkenny and then back again, obviously on Sunday. Or sometimes my parents would drive me to Portarlington from Kilkenny, so that would be about an hour in the car, and then I'd get the train from Portarlington to Galway. Or else JJ Cabinet did a bus service as well, that was great. I could get the bus at 4 p.m. on a Friday. But the thing was, they did a student bus service from University of Limerick as well, and it wasn't feasible to have the two buses on the road at the same time on a Friday evening, so they'd make us stop at a certain point in the journey from Galway, and then we'd be waiting anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour for the Limerick crowd to reach the same kind of junction where they'd stop the bus, and then we'd have to get off our bus in the middle of pitch black because we were travelling in winter, and then get back on the bus with the Limerick crowd and then get home. So I could be travelling for about 4 or 5 hours just to get home from Galway to Kilkenny.
Emer Vranon is a journalist who works at KCLR in Kilkenny. She can't remember a time in her career when she didn't commute.
You're no stranger to the experience of commuting yourself. Tell me about when you actually started commuting full time then.
I have a busy job. I'm a journalist, so I'm always on the go and trying to get from A to B. It's funny actually, I should mention that we're doing this interview while I'm on my commute. So the very first commute, Dylan, I ever went on was when I was first in full-time employment. I was living in Carlow and I got a job in KCLR at that time. And I was just on the road a lot between Carlow and our Kilkenny studio, so it wasn't a big commute, it was just about a half hour. Then after that I started commuting. I got a job in a newspaper in Clonmel in County Tipperary, so I had a longer commute from Carlow to Clonmel, and then I got transferred to a Kildare office where the commute was much less, so I moved to Clane and I had a short commute into Naas every morning. But funny, while my commute was, say, the distance was much shorter from Clane into the office in Naas, the Kildare traffic was something else. So I actually found that I spent a lot of time in the car, even though ironically I was looking forward to having a shorter commute, we'd say. Public transport does not exist outside of Dublin. If you don't live outside Dublin, you really don't understand the reality. For people living in rural Ireland, in rural towns and villages, you cannot get from A to B unless you have a car. I should mention that when I was freelancing and in different jobs while I was in college, I found the commute, again, distances much shorter. So say I was living on the north side for a time and I was working over on Shrewsbury Road or on the south side of the city, and I found the commute really stressful in Dublin because you're trying to get on a different bus and waiting for a bus and at the mercy of bus timetables.
I always wanted to find out the facts behind the psychological impact of regular commuting. Does it really affect our performance at school, college, or even the workplace? I chatted to Finian Buckley, Professor of Work and Organisational Psychology at DCU Business School, to find out his opinion on things and to explore the findings of an experiment he carried out on the subject.
We got a sample of 200 employees and we did a big survey, myself and Brendan O'Regan, my co-researcher. First of all, about how they commuted. We had those who commuted by train or dart. We had those who commuted by car, walking, and those who commuted by bus. We asked them then whether their commute stressed them, and really what we got is a response that said over 80% of those who commuted each morning felt stressed at the end of the commute. Of the 4 different commute types, those who commuted by train and dart, they were our number 1 most stressed group. They said primarily it was that the dart and the trains are just crowded in the morning at commute time, and they found this really, really uncomfortable. The cramped conditions were just too much, and no matter how positively they thought about it, they walked into work in a negative mood. The result was pretty similar for the bus commuters, although they weren't as stressed as the train and dart commuters. And what surprised us was the car commuters came in third. Now they were still stressed, but just not as much as the train and bus commuters.
We can see that commuting now is very different compared to what it was like in the past. Something else that has changed as a result of the development of modern technology is what people do to keep themselves amused during their commute. I asked Wilson and Sean what they do to keep themselves occupied during their commute.
I listen to music, look out the window, but sometimes if it's something important coming up,
Like college work?
college work, yeah, like a presentation, an in-class test, or even a test in general, I look over the notes just before I get to my destination.
What is it like studying on a bus?
Studying on a bus, it's not quite, I'd still take notes in, but it's not as easy to study as at home or in the library because of all the noise and the scenes going outside.
I listen to music, have Spotify on my phone, that's great. I'd read if I was on the train. For some reason, it doesn't affect me as much on the train, but on the bus, I do get a bit travel sickness. I wouldn't really like to read. I find that agitates it a bit. I know that happens to a lot of other people I know as well. Just apps on the phone, like Sudoku, stuff like that.
And what about college assignments? You get to do college work or?
I try to, like often, especially going back up on the Sunday, they'd usually be reading or something to be done for Monday morning. It would depend if it was like, especially if I was on the train, like they would be packed, and I just find it really distracting to work with all the commuters around you. There's so much noise. So it wouldn't really be for me. I prefer to be like in my room, tucked away in a quiet corner and just focus on it. But for people who are able to just block everything else out and focus on the work, I think commuting, it would be good for them to fit the workload in, definitely, yeah.
But what did Emer do with her time back when we weren't spoiled for choice?
What did you do during your commute, Emer? Because obviously things have changed so much with modern technology.
It's funny, I haven't actually thought about this before, but the more I think of it now that you mention it, when you're a journalist, and I know everyone is attached to the phone nowadays, but even when people weren't, I had a BlackBerry, and it was like an extension of my arm nearly, because I was always working on a story. It was basic enough. I had email probably on a BlackBerry, and even if you go even a little bit further back, I think I spent a lot of time on those Dublin buses, people watching and being entertained as well, because I love stories. So I'd end up like on the back of the number 13 bus or whatever. I found out lots of things on my commute. I found out one day how you actually shoplift a pair of runners. I'm not condoning that kind of practice, but I mean the things you'd hear. People share an awful lot in really public places. I'm kind of fascinated by that.
We have certainly come a long way in terms of commuting, but there is always room for improvement. I asked my contributors about difficulties which they encounter during their commutes and what needs to be done to improve that.
One of the biggest challenges is probably the finance, budgeting and all, because obviously students are on a very limited income as it is. It's a lot of expense and a lot of time, and I think a lot of students have to do it because they have part-time jobs to come home to at the weekend or something. There are easier ways to be able to fit this all in if public transport was better for them.
In your opinion then, what needs to change to improve commutes?
There were certainly like a large crowd that were in the same boat as me, like I said, when we were stuck on that bus waiting to catch up with Limerick for over an hour. So I think like there is the need there, there is a demand. I think if they did run a direct bus service, they definitely would get customers into it. Irish Rail, they could definitely have less of a waiting time between connecting trains. That can be a huge problem.
I think the roadworks of the N7 has been dragging on way too long. There's 2 lanes and they're making a 3rd lane for each side, but that 3rd lane has been going on for over a year now, which is pretty ridiculous.
How long has your journey been increased by each day?
The shortest time would be 10 minutes, but the longest time could be 30 minutes. My last 2 weeks for the 9 a.m. lectures, I've arrived very late. I've arrived at 9:30 because of the traffic on a motorway.
How do your lecturers react to you turning up late then?
Well, my lecturer is actually really nice, so he doesn't really mind, but it's just not an ethical kind of thing to do.
And does it cause stress?
Kind of cause stress, because as I said, it's not based on my morale.
Emer, would you trust driverless buses?
I think I would trust them. I probably don't right now, but I think in the future we're going to see a lot more of that, and the technology is going to improve and it's going to get safer. It'll probably be safer than having a human at the wheel.
There are a number of things that could be done, and again, bodies like Transport Infrastructure Ireland and various others have suggested that putting tolls on the M50 would be one thing that you could do. If they chose to apply this called multi-point tolling, if they chose to apply that on the M50 tomorrow morning, there would be an instant, immediate effect of recongesting the suburbs, which the M50 was built to relieve.
And there are also talks of reducing speed limits as well to keep traffic flowing.
This is the notion that a variable speed limit will be applied on the M50. But if we change the law, we can bring in regulation by sign. And what that means is that the overhead gantries on the M50 will set the M50 speed limit. And that in turn means that traffic controllers, they can manage the speed based on the congestion that's on the road.
We need to think about the flexibility of our starting times, and in fairness, lots of employers are beginning to do that. So they have flexi time about what time you start in the morning. You can come really early if you want, and that means at the end of the day you can leave early if you want. And we know from an employee's perspective, when they're given that adaptability or flexibility, they pay back in spades. Our schools haven't flexed at all though. Maybe schools should have some flexibility, or flexibility for different classes as you moved into adolescence.